so we've gathered this gang back together and we are going to talk about wellness and well-being for helping professionals. The reality is, I always think of what Charles Figley said, like our job is like to bear the pain of others, bear pain. There's going to be kickback from that. There's going to be impact. There's going to be a ripple effect. And we usually see some pretty, I say standard characteristics, but we also see a lot of individual manifestation of that. So we're going to talk about that today. And I'm going to open it up with asking about maybe the first time you guys noticed that the impact of the profession really does leave some residual in your personal life.
I think the first time that I connected with the impact that being a therapist and doing therapy had on me as an individual was, and it was such an epiphany and one of those duh kind of moments. I actually had a client that had passed. Thankfully, nothing because of, nothing that I did or did wrong or whatever. It was something completely separate, but it was one of those clients that's always on time or early, and they were late. And I was like, this is, usually that, clients do that, but this client was not one of those kind of clients. So I had called to follow up and then found out that the client, had passed, and really bothered me. And I couldn't figure out why, like, that's not a person, it's a client. Why is this bothering me? And I was going through like a sense of grief about the whole thing. And it really kind of connected with, these are real people, these are real relationships, and which actually kind of led to some of the research that I'm doing even now, that I think that was not really taught in grad school, is that you are in a very professional relationship, but you're also in a very real relationship. And the things that people do and don't do in session impact you, just like any other kind of relationship. But that's when it really connected with me early on in my career.
Love that.
Yeah, I had a similar incident in terms of death, but so early on I had a client commit suicide, and I mean, that, especially early on in a career, that'll really throw you for a loop. This fella came to see me. He was already seeing a therapist for his depression. Came to see me for like a side kind of sort of thing that I never really fully understood. I only saw him twice, but we would always be processing through what he was bringing in, which was just this depth of just sadness that he was carrying with him. Had a wife and a really stable job, and just like, kind of the picturesque kind of thing, but the reality of the severity of his depression was so evident. And the way that he talked about it was, I even still feel emotion when I talk about it now, 20 something years later. Because he was so authentic and genuine with his pain, and so it was just so real. Of course, I assessed each time he was, there's no threat to himself at the time. He had been Baker acted like, or involuntarily committed multiple times before by his previous therapist. I mean, he was coming in. I'd spoken with his wife after the sessions and stuff, and like, everybody's keeping eyes out, whatever. And sure enough, he committed suicide. And that, even just having seen him twice, I connected strongly with him because of that authenticity, and also I feel this depth of pain that he was going through, which a lot of clients who are, suicidal or suicidal ideation, really a depth of depression, don't often show it fully. There's a lot of guardedness that you'll see. There can be, anger, irritability. It can manifest in a lot of different ways. This was like, you knew what this guy was going through. And so, that really, really, that affected me emotionally so much. I reached out and spoke with a couple, ER doctor friend of mine, and then therapist friend of mine, and then I spoke with a therapist friend of mine a couple of times. A lot of journaling, just talking about this. It really took time for me to be better with this, to where I didn't keep showing up to my therapy office and feeling this, like, oh, I'm gonna open myself up to connect with and be vulnerable with other people again. That was really, really difficult. Yeah, for sure. And as like I said, I still feel that day even. So, you know.
I think that's the thread of when there's risk or harm or death or someone that's in extreme pain. I feel like that was the entire introduction of me to the profession, because I went right into working with suicide and homicide, right into crisis work, and realized very quickly, like, wow, you are like touching electricity every day. And when you walk away, you still feel the sting of touching it. And
That's a good metaphor. I love that. Yeah.
that just came to me. So thanks. But that's what it felt like. It felt like every day you were like touching something that really sent energy through you. And the idea of like, now I have to live with touching this and I have to continue. I felt the residual like sting of it over and over. It inspired me of like what I focused on for my dissertation, the indirect effects of trauma, because I just felt like it was a constant thing, that it was so in your face, that never remember learning that in my graduate program. Never remember people talking about, like, by the way, you'll start to notice that you don't want to hang out with people as much because you are now drained from everything that you've been doing. Or I worked really closely with a colleague who worked primarily with sexual abuse. And she would say, I got so intense with my kid the other day because I could tell they were hiding something. And it just made me start thinking about, if they hide something this small, if something ever happened to them and they were sexually abused, would they tell me? So there was this instant like jolt of worry that we need to make sure that they're telling us everything all the time. And I said, that's a side effect of what we do. Like, there's a lot of side effects. When you take a medication, I feel like there's a list that comes with you. You get it from the pharmacy, and then there's this like 14-page list. Here's the side effects of what will happen if you take this medication. But that's not really the case with understanding the helping profession. Like, I feel it's almost like a sub paragraph.
Well, there's a paradox. And I learned that early on. And I think that's why, when my professors taught self-care, and it's ambiguous, that's how it's kind of treated. But in being aware, I knew my professors really well, and I knew they didn't practice self-care, and I didn't practice self-care and with it some myself, not as much as I did, but certainly have had seasons. So the paradox is that we know what we should be doing, we teach what we should be doing, but we don't live what we should be doing. And by and large, I found that people in the helping professions are really good at taking care of other people and really bad at taking care of themselves. And that's until it really kind of connects with you. And what I mean by connects, until you fall flat on your face, until you wake up in the doldrums of depression or like a burnout or whatnot, and it's really impacting you. It's hard to take it seriously because you don't see other people taking it seriously, even the people who are teaching you.
Yes. This interesting because I've been looking into this topic. And one of the things that I remember seeing, and I kind of chuckled when I read it, because it said, if you're not practicing it and you tell this to your supervisors to practice self-care, it falls on deaf ears because they see you're not doing it. And I kind of laughed to myself thinking, that is every professor or mentor that I can remember was not someone who balanced it well. They were people who dove into their careers and loved what they were doing. And I think that to me has always been a piece that I kind of struggle with. Like, if I always say, well, if I love it and I enjoy it so much, then it is my doing something good, or it is my, and the reality is there still has to be more care put in there. So that brings up, like, how do you maintain your wellness? Like, what's the thing that you go, this is what I learned about how to maintain wellness as a helping professional? That's a
Next.
long delay, guys. It's a long delay, which makes me worried. Should I start with, have you learned how to maintain wellness?
Depends on the day. You know, I can't. I feel like it's like for me, it's like walking a tightrope, and it's not you put one foot in front of the other, but it's not like you don't always have to find your balance with the situation. Every step requires new balance, and so I can't say that I always do that right or well. I think some things awaken my senses to the fact that I need to be, and that usually that awareness circles me back into taking care of myself and planning. It really has to be like an active approach for me in order to really engage. I have to block things. I have to plan things, or they don't happen, and sometimes it's so easy. The other thing about our field is people will take everything that you've got. They might thank you, they probably won't, and they'll ask for more. And sometimes you're in that cycle, and slowly, as the metaphor of the frog who's slowly being cooked, you're finding the temperature's going up and you didn't know it.
Yeah, so I mean that speaks to a couple of stories here, and it brings up a bigger question, I guess, for me. You both mentioned supervisors or professors or whatever. Well, I mean, I had one I admired greatly. Um, However, this person was married multiple times, going through the third or fourth divorce, ended up several years later getting fired from the job um, due to, let's just say, bad behavior. And but an amazing uh, mentor, supervisor, and professor. Uh, Fast forward to me last week when we talked about when we were talking about whatever we were talking about. I shared that I'm dealing with long COVID. One of the symptoms I had is depression. Took the back depression and like I was like way up there, almost really concerned, and been seeing a therapist and everything. However, why did it take me so long to see a therapist? I mean, I was like resistant to the idea after it was suggested many times by my wife Elizabeth, and just thinking, well, it's not that bad, or I'm journaling, I meditate every day, I'm kind of like doing, and finally she said, look, and then it kind of clicked with me. I'm like, why am I not doing this? But it's like this many. So this is the question, like, how can my professor had been in the profession for decades, and I've been in the profession for decades. How can we get to this point? And I can speak to self-care, and I know I can give lots of examples of how I've built my life around having that and balancing things and maintaining that. But then I still like would get to a point recently, months ago, and then just like kind of not see it and have to have somebody close to me multiple times tell me. So I just want to throw that question. I mean, I think that's maybe a bigger picture kind of question too, because we can speak to people and give advice and stuff, but it's like reality is we're not going to see it sometimes either. So,
Well, I think we've hit the trifecta of the three biggest paradoxes that I see in our profession, and one is self-care, the other is getting your own therapy, and then the third are relationships. We teach relationship skills we don't always practice. But kind of circling back, I know for me, and I tell this all the time, I tell all the students, you should get, you should do self-care. You should have your own therapist. This is a thing, and I've been through therapy myself. I encourage it. At the very least, it will increase your insights as a person. It will increase your empathy as you work with people who are sitting across from you. The struggle the people around me, I either know or have trained or educated at some point, or have been through trainings or research, or so on and so forth, or they're good friends with someone I have. The first time, I think, when I moved back here, that I looked for a therapist, it took me 2 years to really find someone that I connected with and that I felt safe with, like, kind of going to. And I know, Rob, you talked about the vulnerability component and whatever. And it was really finding someone that I felt that was, competent, to treat me, and two, that I meshed with, but also someone that I felt like safe enough to be vulnerable with. And that took a while for me to do.
I feel like that is a nail on the head of like how hard it is when you do have let's say a really good working network of professors and therapists and supervisors, and you want to dive into therapy, but man, is it hard to find your own. And it's hard to find someone who's competent in the areas that you're seeking for it. So if I say I want this, I'm looking specifically for someone who has these kind of skills. I feel like we know a lot of people with those skills, or it is a close person to that person. And so then sharing who you are with that person and how easily that could get into the network or anywhere else is super tricky. Here's the other piece I would say is, you mentioned markers, kind of like knowing when you need to get in. By the time sometimes, and I say this for me and I say this for maybe a couple really close people I know, by the time the marker alerts you that you really need to be doing self-care, you need to get into therapy, you need to make some changes, that's you've been swallowed up. The ability to find time and now invest in the time to find someone to now make all these little changes gets very tricky. And it's almost as if you have to dig out. So the idea of maintaining wellness means having to put some of the things you're working on the back burner to now make that a priority. And that becomes very tricky. So I said it a little bit ago, I've been like reading in this and kind of researching it for a different project. And one of the things I read, again, these things kind of make me laugh. And it said, when you start to notice that you are getting to that point or you're experiencing burnout, you need to take a break from supervising, teaching, seeing clients. Like, it just listed off all these possibilities, things you need to take a break for and take a step back. And I thought, yeah, that's stellar. Is that realistic? Do we just stop working? Do we stop? Like, when this is your job, and especially, let's take that a step further. Let's say it's private practice or it's contract, right? You do not have any other source to maintain your home and your, like, if this was I'm working in an office 9 to 5, I could take sick days. You don't really have sick days essentially as a therapist. Many, the concept of sick days and time, that when you come back, it hasn't impacted or rippled out. And so I think that kind of made me chuckle. Like, are the expectations that we have for people in this profession almost so unrealistic that the idea of taking care of yourself has to be on the back burner to survive or to keep going in this field? Is it realistic for us to do that?
Yeah, I know. Kind of one of my 80s movies was Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I often thought, if he did a sequel, like when he was in his 30s, or when he was 29, like Dr. Stewart will be this Friday, I would think it would need to be Ferris Bueller's Week Off, because
Oh,
he didn't have struggles then, like was going to, we didn't know it at that point when we were kids. We thought, well, he's got a lot of stressors. No, he doesn't.
no.
Man, is he going to? And it's just like what you were talking about, identifying. It's like, well, I could not work and then I just don't get paid, and I could do that. I could choose to do that. And which meal would I like to give up later or whatever? So there are always choices, and there are always, you've got to kind of look through the lens of What is it that I'm willing to take off my plate, or what is it I'm willing to give up in order to get what I need? And sometimes it's not it's a painful trade-off.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a significant change, and it's also not something normally, at least for me, I'll own that I can do overnight. I can't toggle a switch and say, well, I'll just pull this off my plate, because everything has other pieces going people. And so if you do this, it's a ripple effect. And so, it's not so easy. Whereas like when I was younger, if we wanted to do a day, we would just be like, I'm going to do a day off. It was very much was
Yeah.
a Ferris Bueller kind of thing. I'm going to blow off school. I'm going to blow off this or that or whatever. And do it. Now it's like, for people, can I tick off in one day by not showing up? And then what about, as a young therapist, you're like, if I don't show up and something happens to them, I feel like my fault. I can't cancel a session. Even all these other kind of extrinsic pressures and whatnot. But you know, and along the same lines as fair, I think one of the things that gave me permission to reach out to like therapy that was not me sitting in a pot that was boiling over was actually a conversation that we heard at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference, and I was there with Dr. Spencer, and we heard Dr. Irvin Yalom, who is someone that I have I mean, it's just an amazing person. And there were like probably 5 or 6 thousand people there to hear him. Nobody left. Everybody wanted to hear everything he had to say. But one of the things that he said is, he's been in therapy his entire life, his entire career. Here's a person who really wrote a lot of books and has done a lot of amazing work or whatnot. And yet he continues to be in therapy. There was one group that he was in for like 30 years that it was still going at the time. And it just really gave me permission, because sometimes, particularly as counselor educators and counselors in general, people have this idea that you've got it together and you've got all the answers. And and I'm just feeling like I continue to show up until somebody figures out I don't know what I'm doing here, and so you really kind of live with that internal turmoil of people anticipating that you have the answers and you knowing that you don't. And so there's always almost there has to be that permission that like it's okay to be human. And even if you've got the answers or whatnot to some things, it doesn't mean that you don't need therapy yourself, or that you don't need additional self-care, or that some of these things need to come off your plate. It's like it's an entire process for me anyway.
Yeah, that kind of, so I don't know, can we transition to something that's
Yeah.
parallel to this, but it kind of like, it also doesn't mean that you can't your life and a therapy practice up, or working in community mental health or whatever, in a way that doesn't have, healthy boundaries to maximize your ability to have self-care as well too. And this is one thing that I'm amazed with both seasoned therapists and new therapists is the loose boundaries that they will have, that can be so impeding on your personal life. And for example, clients having your personal cell phone number, and which they would have mine, but I would have very clear boundaries with that in terms of texting and responding like that. And they knew it, I knew it, we were good with it. Texting clients on weekends after hours, worrying about them, and I think I'm going to call and check in on them, and like having the big bleeding heart kind of therapist sort of thing, which is full and is needed in some respects and in certain instances. But I think long term, it's a huge disservice to yourself and your relationships. And that's got to be watched and protected, I feel like, from the very beginning. So let me throw that out there.
So that to me sounds like what boundaries do you put in place to keep yourself well? So cell phones, yes. For me, I'd say I had a space on the road from my office to back to the house, that once I passed it, I imagined it was like an invisible, like a force field. So that when I went through it, I'm like, no, nothing else can come with me. Like, and I would say it out loud. For years, actually, I'd say it out loud when I passed that space. And I'd be like, that's it. I'll pick it back up when I pass this space on the way back to the office. And I'd just say it out loud so that it was there and it was real. I passed it. No one else was in the car with me, but I passed it and I know it's real that I went through this force field and I'm leaving the thoughts of the clients. I'm leaving the, especially working it with a really high risk population. I'm leaving that worry. I'm leaving all of that right there. I put it at the force field and I'll pick it back up when I come back, because otherwise I'll wonder, I hope they're okay. Hope everything went, like they seemed fine when we ended today, like the thought will go with me. And that really was helpful. Now it's been not as helpful having like a home office. That's never as helpful because it's very tricky in a space where you don't actually like have a force field ability, maybe walking out of the office itself. But I would say the other thing is, and I said I laughed at the idea of taking off from parts of this job and how do you survive that. But I have been blessed enough to have a space of time where I didn't see clients at all. And now going back into, being back in seeing clients and having it restart, the excitement that I feel now, the refreshed feeling that I feel, I look forward to, like when a session, like in my mind, I think, oh, that's, this week I'll get to see so-and-so. And that has actually been exciting. So I can see the benefits, but that only happened because I had to, juggle other jobs around basically so that I can make that work to take the break. So that boundary of like, if it gets too much, taking a break and then coming back really does make a difference for my wellness.
One of the things I always really loved what Dr. Eubanks did. I used to, and I'll brag on him for a minute. He's world-class surfer, and he's lived the endless summer life and whatnot. But one of the things that Rob used to close his practice during the summer. And so he and his wife would, they would get into what I envision as this old VW bus maybe, and just drive around the coast and surf every 5 minutes. I don't know, but this is something that he kind of lived out. He closed his for a period of time, and my initial knee-jerk reaction to that was anxiety, about like, well, where would my clients go? Would I, how long would it take me to reestablish, and all these different kinds of things. But and he said something like, yeah, it's good to and it's a refresh, which is exactly what Dr. Spencer was saying there too. Sometimes I wonder if that's not something that we should all or have or participate in or whatnot, because seeing clients ongoing does impact you physiologically. We see the science behind. And I wonder if it's something but we go back into the problem with, sure, you can do that, but if you're seeing clients all the time and that's your gig, you're going to have to double up and see, them on the months, for some months prior to you taking a month off or whatever in order to eat or what have you. And of course, Rob just went out and he just fished and hunted, and so he didn't have to do all that. That's part I'm just making up, but all the other stuff's real.
There's something about the idea of like taking the time to refresh, but the ability is very tricky. And I think it's fascinating that we're all saying the beauty of taking a break, and yet I don't think that's in any place that I remember in my training of people saying you should consider having, a season where it's lighter, or you should consider having, like in the holidays, like I always say, like, it's awesome because in thinking of doing it around Christmas, because, and I know Dr. Brown, you've done that before, like around Christmas, people tend to be away and traveling. And so it might be a little easier to do this, but here we are saying how beneficial it is, but I just don't remember that ever being a discussion of like, you might need to take time, or it might need to be a cyclical thing where you take a break or you have a lighter load so that you can restore.
Yeah, and to add a few things to that, so it was healthy for me for sure, but it was also healthy for my clients, which can be baffling if you think about it at first. But really, if I've been seeing people for several months, and they know, like I would always start like 8 weeks ahead of time, planning for the summer, telling everybody, even new clients, I would be like, I'm just so you know, I'm leaving in 3 weeks for 2 months. If you're okay with that, I'd be glad to see you a couple of times. But and so they would know, and so there's this whole expectation set up, but also it gave them a break from me and from the process. And they would come back with very different things that we would be talking about, which is really interesting. And oftentimes it was a perfect closing time to people who were just kind of hanging on to therapy and kind of like, yeah, but I still need to come back. I still need to, well, you can't come back starting June 1st. And then they would be fine and like good things. And then it opens the door for new clients to come in. So it's refreshing well too. But yeah, it's a lot of it I find is harnessed around this need of like, there's people who need me. Like, I can't just say no. Like, I've got to take this person on. They're hurting so bad. Their marriage is falling apart. They're whatever. And where do you just never draw? So at some point you have to draw a line, and it can't be at the point of pain. It's got to be way before that. And so one of the things that I talk about is knowing your capacity, which you have to learn that. It takes a while to learn that, but know what your capacity is for being in doing a therapy practice, a private practice, or even teaching full time, or doing both like I've done. Know what your capacity is, but also exactly what Sarah was saying is don't fear transition either, because that capacity is going to change over time, because you'll have some things smooth sailing for a while, but then it's like, I've got these other opportunities. I have no space in my life for them, and I'm kind of not as good in this thing, and allow yourself the freedom to transition, of course, without making big compromises or, or compromising your financial well-being or your families or whatever. But those opportunities will be there, and just having to be able to hear them and receive them and respond to them, I think says a lot for the longevity that you can find in this profession.
The thing, I want to link a couple of things together. And that is, knowing yourself as a person, but as a professional. I keep hearing that. And that actually, I feel like comes up a little bit every single time that we all sit down and talk. So I think the idea of like knowing yourself, getting deeper into your self-awareness. You mentioned capacity, understanding your capacity. And then I want to link something Dr. Brown said about, the reality is we know it's very well documented, very clear that we have a physiological impact of being in this profession. I think that's definitely not a discussion that is out there enough. It should be louder. But that when we're completely saturated in hearing strife and hearing pain and hearing stories of trauma and stories of loss, that we have a body reaction. It does impact our body, our brains, our everything. And so the idea of knowing yourself and knowing when we're getting to the point of being full, and I'm pulling it back from the very first thing that we said in the beginning of Dr. Brown said, people don't usually know that until they've fallen on their face and they're literally out for the count. So I think there's something to be said around having some sense of I'm getting close to capacity. I know it. I know where my markers are, that I'm getting past the point of no return. But I see over and over, and I've watched people leave this field. Like I've watched people who have gone through this profession, gone through a master's, got licensed, went through the whole thing. And that's a lot of time and effort and energy and money. and then burned out and said, I just can't take it. Like, I'm physically can't take it. What do you say to encourage or inspire or motivate around the idea of like knowing that capacity? How do you make it there? What's some tip or guidance of how do you make it in knowing yourself and knowing how you respond to all this and knowing when you're getting full before it hits rock bottom? Because I have not seen a lot of inspired change before people hit the rock bottom of physically, I can't take it anymore. And I'll be very transparent and say, like, even myself, where I remember just being like sick all the time because my immune system was just not able to keep up. So that we continue to have such pressure and strain of juggling it all. So what's the tip or motivation? What's the encouragement that you give someone about knowing that marker, knowing that capacity before it gets too bad?
I would say nobody bullshits us more than ourselves. And so we will tell ourselves that we're fine, that we're okay, or that it's the client's problems, or I just have problematic clients, or it's because the insurance isn't paying, or I have a bad supervisor, or whatever. Getting the ability to be able to step out of that and have objectivity comes, in my mind, relationally, systemically, because we live in relationship. And so who are those that are closest to us? Are they hearing us just complain all the time and be a victim all the time of our career? Ask for some feedback from those who love and care about you. You know, does it seem like I like this? Does it seem like I might be able to part of the problem here? What should I be doing? You know, ask friends, family, partners, but also ask colleagues too. Also ask seasoned colleagues too, because they will have a little bit more insight into where you might be. But yeah, I mean, that, like you said, Sarah, that's the fear that I see with you, is they just don't see it early enough on, and then the burnout is so great. It's like they do need to get out of the profession because they're just too deep into misery land that they're just not going to be able to come back, at least not anytime soon, in a good place. So
I think much like the therapeutic window, there's a therapist window. And you know, I've been through the forms myself and working with trauma and actually and teaching it and stuff like that, where objective measures that measure like where you're at with regards to resilience, with burnout, and with self-care. And there are markers that let you know if you're backsliding. And I have literally filled those things out for myself before. It seems it's intimating that the pot is boiling over, and then just kind of transition to my next meeting. You know, because at that point I was not really willing to or ready to deal with the consequences or what I needed to do to change directions, because I knew that was going to take a lot of effort, and I was already running on all nines, you know, 9 cylinders, because they make 9-cylinder cars. I was, you know, just like flat out ninth cylinder going. And so and at that point it's like, how do you stop? You know, like that takes more effort. I don't have more effort to give, so I'm going to just keep doing this. But that is, you know, that therapist window is like, okay, where you see yourself, you're able to see yourself, you're safe enough to see yourself and to actually do something about it.
so let's create an assessment called the therapist self bullshit meter.
There you go. 0 to 10.
Yeah, that's you even took, and still just kind of like, so if you would have had a
Yeah.
denial assessment of some sort, then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, and I'm lying to myself.
Yeah. They should go hand in hand. Those two things should be merged.
Right.
I love the idea of I've heard therapeutic window, but I've never heard therapist window. That is definitely, we've coined it right here. Dr. Brown, that's yours.
Therapist one.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for chatting. That's a good place to stop.
Can I drop a book real quick?
Yeah.
I'm Being a Therapist, Jeffrey Kotler.
Oh, okay.
I think every therapist should read that, particularly people who are you. It's wonderful.
And I would also say A Gift of Therapy by Irvin Yalom. And it's necessarily because he talks about self-care, but he does address his own therapy in that book. And it is a gift. It's a real gift to